A family divided by an ocean now. Dermot Manahan reports for the big story.
On tonight's big story, heartache and misery as British mothers fight to bring their children back home.
I love my children, I want to see them.
We travel to Germany, America and Greece to follow the harrowing stories of mothers who feel international law has failed them and their children. There's an international law which is supposed to cut as much suffering as possible out of so-called tug-of-love cases. It's called the Hague Convention on Child Abduction. The 41 nations which signed it agreed that in international custody battles, children would always be returned to their home country while their futures were sorted out. Their interests were to be protected and their cases were to be heard as quickly as possible. But in too many cases, things have gone badly wrong because foreign courts won't play by the rules. Gatwick Airport last Thursday, Jane Roberts and her three small daughters, Brittany, Emily and Dorrigan, are setting off for Boston in America. The girls are the subject of a court order which requires us not to show their faces. Jane has been ordered to return to Boston to attend a court hearing. It's part of a year-long custody dispute with her American husband, Kevin. Jane married Kevin Roberts 10 years ago. He was then a drill sergeant in the Marines. He turned out to be a violent and overbearing man. The marriage began to fall apart. Last August, Jane took the girls to visit her mother in England. Kevin was going to join them later, but then he suddenly alleged Jane had abducted the children. He used the Hague Convention in the British High Court to force them to go back to the United States for a full custody hearing.
He just goes in, says that I'm an unfit mother, you know, that my sister's a prostitute, I'm a drug addict, I'm a lesbian, I live in squalor in England, my father's in a mental hospital, I was brought up in care, none of which have, there's no truth in any of it, nothing. He just went in and said all this.
Despite the insults, Kevin told the British court he accepted that Jane had custody of the girls while they waited for the case to be heard. But Kevin was lying. He and his lawyer had arranged an unpleasant surprise for his family when they returned to America. On September the 22nd last year, Jane Roberts, the children and her mother landed at Boston Airport. She was immediately taken away to an interview room.
In the back room there were two uniformed state police officers and my husband sitting on the table in plain clothes, swinging his legs. And I knew this was a setup of some sort.
Outside the room, Jane's mother Sandra was with the children. They could see 5 state troopers surrounding the room where Jane was held and many more around the customs hall.
There was a whole posse of armed state troopers and lots more customs men and various other officials standing around. And her husband just shot out of a side room, snatched the children from us and took off down the airport.
More state troopers held Jane captive as her daughters vanished from sight.
It's horrifying. It's just indescribable. It's indescribable. It's the worst feeling in the world to see your children taken like that.
The children's seizure had been sanctioned by the courts of Plymouth County, Massachusetts. The American court had refused to enforce the British court order with which Kevin had agreed that Jane would look after the children. Back in England, the case was taken up by Jane's mother's MP, former Home Office Minister Charles Wardle.
In this case, the Massachusetts courts appeared to have disregarded the Hague Convention completely. The British High Court order was ignored, and nothing was done about it in the Massachusetts courts.
Emily, Brittany and Dorrigan were taken to live with their father. Jane was only allowed to see them for 2 hours a week under the strict supervision of Kevin's mother.
The little one would just fall on the floor, start screaming and cling to my leg, and his mother would rip her off me. She'd be screaming and screaming, and I used to have to run out of the house.
It took 6 weeks and $25,000 in legal fees for her to get the children back.
The Hague Convention was useless in this case. There was no automatic provision requiring the husband to actually obey the order of the High Court.
Last Friday, Kevin Roberts and Jane arrive at the courthouse in Brockton. Winning her children back was just the start of Jane's fight. This is her 39th day in court in a year. This time, Jane, supported by her stepfather Nick Fenn, is here because Kevin's failed to pay maintenance and child support, forcing her onto welfare. But the case is postponed yet again.
Every penny that we spend on legal costs, and we've so far spent way over £50,000, is money which could have gone to the welfare of the children. And all it goes on is lawyers' fees and sitting around in a courtroom waiting for a judge who half the time has gone off for a half-day's holiday and doesn't turn up.
When Jane won back custody of her girls in the American court, they went to live in the family house in the pretty harbour town of Scituate near Boston. But in June they were evicted because Kevin had failed to pay the rent, despite making a solemn promise to do so to the British and American courts. This is where Jane and her daughters ended up on their return from England last week, a mobile home in a friend's garden. She knows this is bad for the children, but she's been told she's legally required to remain in Plymouth County at least until January next year, when the trial is scheduled, despite having no home or money.
I'm hoping and praying that I find somewhere to go. Otherwise, you know, it's a refuge. I don't want to subject the children to that. I honestly don't know how I'm going to survive. You know, I was ordered to return here to prepare for the trial. And survive, basically. I don't know how I'm going to do it.
Life's rather more comfortable for Kevin. As well as being a state trooper, he has a second job as a live-in caretaker. So he's living here with his new girlfriend in an 18th century house set in a private park. Kevin's broken yet another promise made at the Hague Convention hearing. In rural America, you can't survive without a car, and Kevin agreed to provide safe transportation. This wreck cost him all of $50. Jane can't afford to repair it. A day out at the lake for the children. Jane's greatest fear is for them. If she runs out of money, she may have to leave them behind in the United States. It's happened to women before in custody battles. In this case, it's a terrifying prospect. The local social services department has informed the court that 2 of the girls have been subject to physical and emotional abuse by their father.
He's not a caring, loving father. The real casualties in this are the children. They're just pawns in his war game at the moment. And, you know, to think that I might have to leave them with him is unthinkable, but it's a real possibility.
Shelley Hibbert has been through what Jane Roberts could now be facing in a US custody battle. She and her daughter Leanne, who now live near Derby, spent 2 years living in near destitution.
Wonderful.
She's got strong advice for other women.
If you were a woman that was about to marry a foreigner and have children, and I'd tell you to seriously think about it, think very hard. And if you were to go over to wherever the husband might be from, I'd definitely tell you not to do it. I'd tell you to stay in England.
5 years ago, Shelley married an American, Andrew Hibbert, in New Jersey. Baby Leanne soon followed, but the marriage collapsed when Andrew started drinking heavily and threatening Shelley.
I just thought the marriage has gone really badly. For my safety, for Leanne's safety, I have to get out, and I just go home, like everybody does. When your marriage breaks up, you go home.
Shelley brought Leanne to England, but using the Hague Convention, Andrew got the British courts to force them back to the States. Just like Kevin Roberts, Andrew promised to look after them while the US courts decided on custody.
He promised to provide us with a home. After 3 months of living there, he then said that he wasn't going to pay the rent anymore anyway, so it was up to me.
After 10 long months, the American judge ruled that Shelley could keep Leanne, but that they had to stay in America so that Andrew could still see his daughter.
The judge awarded me child support and nothing else, no means of any other financial help. She said that I was young and healthy and that I'd be okay.
She was far from okay. Before long, Shelley and Leanne ended up living like down-and-outs, begging food from soup kitchens and sleeping in a homeless shelter.
There were men on one end of the shelter and women and children on the other. The men were only allowed to be in the shelter if they had a narcotics or alcohol problem. Leanne had no idea what was going on. She started losing weight. She actually went down a size in clothes. She got worms. She started hitting other people because that's what she saw the mothers do to these children.
After 2 years of misery, Shelley and Leanne got back to England. Andrew had reluctantly let them leave when he was arrested on a drugs charge. Shelley feels the law failed her.
I think the legal system needs to look at where they're sending these women back to, because I don't think that's being done. You don't ship a child back to America, watch them go into a homeless shelter, watch them lose weight, get worms, start just being a totally different child and just say, oh, well, this was for the benefit of my child.
Campaigners like Denise Carter say there seems to be one law for Britain and quite another elsewhere.
The best place to have your child abducted to is the UK. We implement the Hague Convention to the letter. The applicant is automatically given legal aid and support. If your child's brought to the UK and then returned, the parent has to fight within that legal structure of that country. So if they don't have a legal aid system or a welfare state like we do here, they're going to be penalised if they have no money.
Even when the custody battle is within the European community, you can end up destitute. Larissa, 200 miles north of Athens, is the scene of a real Greek tragedy, in which an English mother and her children are the victims. In August, Sue O'Brien and her 4 children were forced to return here under the terms of the Hague Convention, despite the fact that her husband has a conviction for a knife attack. Now Sue and her 4 children are living in a cramped, sparsely furnished 2-bedroom flat.
Vanessa's is sleeping with me, but Zoe's sleeping in the cot. She can't sleep in a cot. She's 4-year-old. There's no bath. How am I going to bath the children? I've been bathing them in the sink. It's ridiculous. I just can't believe it's happened. It's like a nightmare that they've made me come back to Greece, to this. I can't believe it's happening.
Sue's nightmare began as a romantic dream in the holiday island of Rhodes. In 1988, she met and married Nick Balasinas, but Sue says Nick began drinking heavily and became increasingly aggressive, charges he denies.
It just wasn't a good situation for the children to be brought up. Continual battles and fighting and screaming in front of the children, so I decided to leave.
In November, Sue and the children fled to England to live near her father in Nottinghamshire. But then the unbelievable happened.
I'd been shopping, I came back to my dad's house and there was a man waiting for me and he served me with a subpoena to go to court, charging me with abducting my own children, which is a nightmare. How can I abduct my own children?
In August, Sue flew back to Athens. The High Court in England had ruled that the children must be returned to Greece, but the father had to make important pledges to the court.
The undertakings were that Nick would pay the rent, the utilities, the water, the electricity, and pay me living allowance.
Nick was at the airport to meet his children and appeared to be conciliatory towards Sue. But as soon as they arrived at the flat, the arguments began. 2 weeks later, Nick flew off to Rhodes. He abandoned Sue with no money to live on except the child benefit that she was able to claim from the Greek government. Despite his undertakings to the British court, he didn't continue to pay the rent. Eventually, Sue's landlords paid her a visit.
Both of them came in the door, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, and shouting and screaming, who's going to pay the rent? Who's going to pay for the water? Who's going to pay for the electricity? Why hasn't your husband sent you some money? Why is he not going to pay? Why have you got all these boxes here? And if you don't pay your rent, you're going to be thrown out onto the street.
Sue used her child benefit to pay the landlords, but she's now running out of money and is worried about where next month's rent is coming from. Every week, Sue goes to see her lawyer to try and get some action on her case. But in Greece, the wheels of justice turn slowly, and time is not on her side.
The Hague Convention states that If the children have been here more than a year and the Greek courts could drag on for a long time, then the children will be habitually resident here in Greece. So my fear is that we'll never get the children out of the country, so we must try to get things moving as quickly as possible.
The first court hearing is scheduled for October the 6th. For Sue, stranded in a foreign country with no money, no friends and no family, the battle for her children is just beginning.
I just wish I was at home. I just feel like I'm living in a nightmare, and one day I'm going to wake up and I'm back in England and everything's all right, but that's not going to happen, is it? Living here in Greece, it's just an upward struggle.
Sue's problems have arisen because British courts played fair while others didn't.
The problem with the Hague Convention as it stands, as it's implemented in this country, is the High Courts will accept undertakings from the applicant. Now, these undertakings are not enforced in the country to which the parent is returning to. So a parent could promise to pay the rent, pay child support, assist with legal fees. Once that parent goes back, they're not enforced, so the women are there again alone and isolated.
Monday this week, and Catherine Lyle arrives in Verden, North Germany, in a desperate attempt to see her 2 young sons. It's the 10th time she's tried to see them since they were abducted by their German father 14 months ago. In this close-knit community, Catherine, a British citizen born in France, has to keep a low profile in case her husband finds out she's here. It's lonely and frightening for her, but she feels she has to come.
It's horrifying, but I'm desperately worried about the children. I mean, they've been taken away from a mother.
Although Catherine has to behave in this cloak and dagger way, she has the law on her side. After they separated, she and her husband signed a legal agreement recognised in Britain and Germany that she would bring up their 2 sons, Alexander and Constantine, in Britain. They lived with her in London for 2.5 years until their father abducted them to Germany.
I mean, it's like, you know, half of me was taken away from me. And, you know, and you miss the cuddles and you miss the warmth. And after all, they're my children, they were in my stomach, they're part of me.
Her husband, Peter Falkman, brought the boys here to his hometown of Verden. Under the Hague Convention, he was completely in the wrong and should have been forced by the German courts to hand the children back. But instead, he's been allowed to keep them, and he's making sure that their mother can't get to them.
They're living in a house in the middle of the woods, completely secluded. My children, for the moment, I kept, it seems, like 2 tiny little prisoners. They've been cut off from the rest of the world, cut off from their friends, their family, from anything they knew before.
A local German court awarded her husband custody. Catherine was allotted just 1 3-hour visit a month, but he refuses her even that.
All my rights have been completely ignored. What is absolutely incredible was that during that court hearing, I was not heard at all. My evidence was not looked at. I had 24 affidavits from friends of mine saying that I'm a normal person and happy, and the children were happy and everything.
Tuesday this week, Catherine has come to her children's school in the hope of seeing them. She watches as the other children leave, but there's no sign of her own. She's despondent. She feels sure her husband knows she's here and has deliberately kept them away from school.
He's scared that I should see the children because the children would probably come, and after a day or 2 to be alone with their mummy, at least Constantine for sure would say, "Mommy, I want to come home."
Catherine goes to see her German lawyer. Her costs so far have been £70,000. He gives her bad news. Her husband has somehow persuaded the German court the children don't want to go home.
The main problem in the moment is, I think, that the children in the moment are very strongly influenced by the father, and he has the better cards, I would say.
Catherine's children are only 8 and 10 years old. She decides to call at her husband's house to beg him to let her see them.
I have the right to see them, so I'm going to try and knock on the door.
We couldn't follow her onto private land, but gave her a radio microphone so we could hear what happened.
I'd like to see the children.
Die sind gar nicht da.
Where are the children?
Das wird mal.
But I'd like to see my children, Peter.
Ich muss in die Praxis und die Kinder sind nicht da.
Yeah, I'm the mother of the children, Peter. I would like
Ich
to
möchte
talk
jetzt-
to you.
Nein, ich
Don't
möchte-
push me! Ah!
She realises the children are not there.
Let's go to the other house.
She works out that they're at their grandparents' house.
Alexandre! Tini! Mommy's here to see you!
This is mijn figure.
Her husband's called the police. A distressing scene ensues.
Das ist der Beschluss. Ja, und mein Rechtsanwalt sagt wie... Hello, hi.
Her brother-in-law weighs in.
Mit solchen Methoden wirst du deine Kinder nie wieder kriegen. Nur Unwahrheiten, weißt du?
I just want to see my children.
She's legally in the right, but the police don't help her. Then her husband arrives.
Nein, ich habe den Beschluss schon gesehen, ja.
Ja.
Den Sorgerechtsbeschluss.
Yeah. Why won't you let her see the children? Why won't you let Catherine see her children?
The problem is the mother is ignoring that the children are scared since she tried
Why
to
are the
kidnap them.
children scared?
In fact, it's Peter Falkman who is the abductor under international law, but he's got away with it.
I love my children. I want to see them. Alexander, please.
It's finished. The police can't do anything because in Germany, as the policeman said, you can't enforce visitation rights, so he can't ring at the doorbell. They can do what they want. And the whole town belongs to them. And probably the children were saying, I want to see my mummy. We don't know what's happening inside the house.
Catherine's children were not snatched by a man who lived in a far-off land. Germany is a fellow member of the European community. She's taking the case to the European Court, but that will take up to 3 years.
My case proves to you who gives a damn about any legal agreement, which is what we had. Go and grab your kids, hide from the police from long enough, be clever enough and crooked enough to abduct your children if there is a court hearing against you, and then time will settle in and you will win because you're in your country. And this is exactly what happened.
The German embassy here in London refused to give us an interview about Catherine's case, although they did say they were fully aware of it. An embassy spokesman said that Germany always abided by the international law of the Hague Convention. But when asked why Catherine's children had not been returned to Britain, as they should have been under that international law, the embassy said the case had been, and I quote, settled correctly under German law. And they had no comment to make when we told them that Catherine had not even been allowed to visit her children. Back in Massachusetts this Tuesday, Jane Roberts meets her lawyer for her 40th appearance in an American court. Her husband, Kevin Roberts, is here too for what's going to be a momentous day. In a surprise move, the judge orders Kevin and his lawyer to negotiate with Jane and her lawyer. With all the media interest, the case is now red hot. The haggling goes on for 6 hours. At 5:30, Jane's lawyer rushes into the judge to say they have a document that all parties will sign. After putting his family through misery for a year, Kevin has given in. He'll let the children go back to live in England in exchange for having to pay only $75 a week in child support for them.
Hi, Nick. What happened today?
It's all over. It's all over. He just crumpled. He just capitulated, and as of this moment, Jane is divorced, and it's just over.
And Jane, how do you feel?
Shell shocked and very emotional. I just can't believe it's over. It just hasn't sunk in.
Relieved.
I'm relieved, absolutely relieved. I'm floored.
At last, one happy ending. But many other children will live in misery tonight because the law has failed them.
Thank you.